All right, Frank DeJulius, man. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's a busy time of year for you guys, right? Like this is pretty much your go time. It's fun in Cincinnati, like right now. You just see everyone out running, right? Like it's a
Yep.
cool time. People are training. You guys just came off a big weekend. The last long miler. That's got to be rewarding. Just seeing, the people who started with you at the beginning of training, and now you're at a point where they're coming to the end of training and things are paying off. What's that feel like?
It's great. I mean, I like to remind people we start on a cold, dark Thursday in January. And it's very much emblematic of what Januaries are in Cincinnati. And then when we get to this point, when it's April and the miles get longer, the weather gets better, people's fitness is better. It makes it all worth it, and you start to see a little bit more smiles on people's faces. And this past weekend at our 2012 was great because now it's taper time. We're 3 weeks out, and
Yeah.
we'll get to just focus on staying healthy and recovering and resting until race day.
Yeah, like I said, it's gotta be fun for you to see. Like there's people who got into it that maybe were a little skeptical about like the running ability at the beginning, and it's like they stayed consistent with a plan, right? And like the consistency has paid off to this point where they got to the highest point of their training potential, and now it's taper, and now it's just time to let things take over from there. So it's got to feel good.
It does. Yeah, we tell people, like, just show up.
Yeah.
Just show up, and we'll do the rest. One foot in front of the other, and we got them there.
I feel like that's the biggest thing with like endurance athletes is just consistency. Like stay on top of your training, be consistent with it, and it's almost becomes addicting to that at that point. It's like you see these gains pay off with just the consistency of showing up. And it's one of those cool things that I've found through some endurance training. I'm sure, you're an endurance athlete too. I'm sure you've found those same kind of things too.
100%. I mean, you start to feel better. It becomes part of your daily routine. You do start to see the actual gains that you're making week after week, and it just becomes part of the lifestyle. That's what I love about it as well, and I love it myself, and I also love seeing it in people. Confidence starts to increase, physical changes. You start to see your body change. Not like, oh, I'm trying to lose weight, but just you get more fit, and it's a great feeling, and it is addictive. And so I love seeing it personally. It's why I've been an endurance athlete for the better part of 25 years, and that's why we do this at Fleet Feet.
Yeah. I've always been kind of interested, like, especially for like when patients come in and I'm treating them and they're an endurance athlete. I just had somebody come in who's doing an ultra, and it always is like piques my interest of like what made you want to become an endurance athlete. So if you can talk about that, like 25 years ago when you started and you were like, you know what, this is something I want to do, because it's not like when you're in it, it can be painful. Like there's those times where you're deep in it and you're constantly questioning yourself of like, why am I doing this? But then at the end, it's like your endorphins are so high. It's just what's your mindset around why you became an endurance athlete? What drew you to it? And why you continue to do it?
Sure. I mean, I think I learned early on when I got into it, I'll get back into the second, that I'm addicted to that feeling. I'm addicted to the idea of pushing myself to the limits, emptying my tank, getting to the point where I feel like I can't go one more step, and then going one more step. In the most healthy way possible, I do feel like that is something I'm drawn to do. And growing up, I was always a decent ball sports player, doing the whole thing growing up in school. But when I was in college, I got a job at a running store one summer, and I actually became infatuated with the community around it. I thought I was getting a job at a retail store, and what I learned is it was really more of a community. It was, golfers go to golf courses, skiers go to ski resorts, and runners came to Fleet Feet. And it was the coolest thing for me. And so I loved that. And then all of a sudden I started going out for these runs, and the runs got longer, and I was meeting people that had way more experience than I had at that point. And it just became like this ultimate test of literally my endurance. Could I go out on that 6-mile run with this guy and get back feeling like I, was a human? And there was so many points in that journey where I felt terrible and didn't make it or got hurt or whatever it was, but I always was able to rebound and learn from it, and then keep going. And so that just snowballed into making it part of my lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of cool. Like when you get to that point where you feel like you've had enough, like this is it. I don't know if I can take another step. And you take another step, and it's like, okay, I can take another step from there, and I can keep going. And you just find this like mental capacity of like, okay, I just did a really hard thing, let's see how much harder I can continue to make it, and if I can keep going. It's just like that mental grind of wanting a challenge and just continue to push yourself to a different degree of like those challenging things. And it's insane what the human body's capable of when you put your mind to it. You talked about the community aspect of it. You guys are huge on community over at Fleet Feet. Let's first get into like your background with Fleet Feet. Like you said you worked at Fleet Feet start, and now you guys own a few Fleet Feets. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I was in, like I said, I was going to John Carroll University in Cleveland. I always joke about this, but I remember one summer, I think it was my junior year, I didn't have an internship going. I didn't really have much going on that summer. I was studying business and entrepreneurship. And I was living at my parents' house, and I think at some point I was like, hey, go get a job at the least. And so I did. I got a job at what I thought was more like I knew it was a running store, but to me it was just like a retail job. And shortly, like I was mentioning, I just fell in love with the community aspect of it. So here I was learning all about running, endurance, being a part of this business, also studying business. I knew I wanted to own something at some point. And the more I learned about Fleet Feet, I realized that it was a national franchise. And there was, at that point, like a development program that I could get myself into. So I became pretty, I think this is another trait of endurance athletes. You get pretty one-track mind a little bit. And I became infatuated with this idea of like, okay, I want to own a Fleet Feet someday. There was no real questioning it. I knew I wanted to do this. At the time, there was already a franchise in Cleveland and in Cincinnati, but I just started networking. I got myself enrolled in that program. And that took me on about a 6-year journey. I worked in Fleet Feet stores. I moved to Nashville, Tennessee. I worked in Chicago for a year, and just really did everything I could at that point to prove myself to the franchise that I would do what it would be willing to take, and I would move where I needed to move and get as much experience as I could. So I did that. Sometime in 2010, I was working in Chicago in a store in Chicago. And I got the call. I was like, hey, the store in Cincinnati might be up for sale or might be available. And at that point, I had the experience required. And I called the franchisees at that point who were my good friends. And I said, hey, let's make this happen. Like, you're ready to move on to the next chapter of your life. I would love nothing more than to get back to Ohio. I love Chicago, but I wanted to, I'm an Ohio guy. So, you always get a little bit of luck along the way. And in 2012, my wife and I were able to buy the single store in Blue Ash at that point.
Nice.
And we've just been blessed enough to be able to grow it from there.
You guys have currently 3 stores? 7 stores.
7 stores, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we opened up our second store in 14 in Oakley, and then we went up north to Westchester.
Okay.
Our store at 50 West, I call the pandemic store.
Okay.
Because we were trying to figure out how the heck to stay in business, and I went the other direction and said, well, let's expand. I don't know how smart that was, but it turned out great. And then not that long ago, about 3 years ago, we acquired the Bob Ronker store, which is a whole nother thing, because when I moved to Cincinnati, I was so proud to be finally a business owner, but I was also terrified of competing against the legend of the Bob Ronker's running spot. Nicest guy in the world, but his business was like, how am I going to compete with him?
Yeah.
And so fast forward all these years later to be able to buy his business from him, and well, not directly from him, but to buy the business and then to run those today is truly like sort of an honor.
Yeah. That's awesome. When you talked about Fleet Feet feels like such a community driven store, and what you guys have done with runners and pulling that community together is pretty awesome. Talk about like the community atmosphere, the community feel, or what you guys try to provide as a company for runners as a whole, especially with these, there's pretty good races here in Cincinnati. Obviously the Flying Pig, Queen Bee, Heart Mini, but you guys definitely pull that community together. How'd that all come together? What was the thought behind
it? That's sort of the ethos of what a Fleet Feet store is. I mean, we don't want to just sell you a pair of shoes. We want to run with you. We want to use them and give you a reason to show up after work. It's, that whole third place mentality of, work, home, and Fleet Feet. We want our stores to be a place where people feel comfortable showing up, not just because they need to make some kind of a transaction, but to show up and go for a run and meet a friend. A lot of our stores have coffee bars in them, or a beer fridge, or just chairs to hang out in, because that's really our identity is, come be a part of what we have. We host, an endless amount of community, free community events that just get people on their feet. And it's not about the distance. It's not about the pace. It's just coming together, moving your body. And, our belief is that if we have more people moving in our communities, the healthier we are, the fitter we are, and overall, the better the.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about your stores being like a locker room,
Yeah.
right? And it like gives you that accountability as a runner to have, a lot of the people with the same mentality coming together, just being able to communicate about the same things, the same interests, and then go out and just put themselves through a difficult thing together.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, I learned a fun phrase from my friends at Lululemon. They said they don't create magic, but they create the environment for magic to happen. And I think about that a lot at Fleet Feet. And it's true. I mean, we just want our four walls to be a place where beautiful things, can happen. And that's really the goal.
Yeah. What do you think people most underestimate about their training for the Flying Pig?
Oh man, there's a good amount underestimate. One of the hardest things I think about the Flying Pig, it's not the hills. Everybody knows that Cincinnati's hilly. The weather can be anything. I mean, I've been sweating profusely at the start line some mornings. I've also had, 2 jackets on, hats and gloves. And so it's just it's maybe not
like 3 years ago when there was a monsoon.
Yeah, or it's raining 5 inches. Yeah, and so it's so hard to be prepared for the whatever the weather can bring.
Yeah.
So maybe not they underestimate it, but it's just a tough curveball that this race throws. The first Sunday in May can be anything in Cincinnati.
What do you think, like when people are going through their training and you start to see maybe people fall off during their training, what usually breaks the people down at that point? Like what's the point where they're like, I'm not going to stick with it, or I haven't stuck with it. What happens during those training programs where people just don't stick with it?
It's 17 weeks. That's a long time. And so if you just think about, these are human beings with families and jobs and lives. And so, we see people that just, whether they had, one down week, I had to travel this week and I missed all my runs, and then they throw it away, or they get sick, we're coming through winter and spring. So a lot of just, common cold kind of things. And so we just try to tell people that, marathon training isn't just this like even trajectory where you get better and better. It's got so many ups and downs. And when you hit that valley, don't give up, because that's where we see people, lose it, is they have that one tough week or one curveball hit, and then they just stop showing up.
Yeah.
We reach out to them and say, hey, come on.
Yeah. No, it's good to give them that pat on the back and be like, you've worked so hard for, 10 weeks or 8 weeks or, 4 or 5 weeks. Just the consistency piece we talked about, just try to be consistent with it. And not every like run or training day needs to be perfect.
Right.
You're going to have some of those days where you just don't feel great, but if you can get through those days of training, there are better days on the other side of that.
100%. Yeah. Maybe you just didn't sleep well. Maybe you were more stressed at work or at home than you'd think about, or you're dehydrated, whatever it is. I mean, you're exactly right. There's just so many ups and downs in a 17-week training cycle. I mean, or it could be longer. And yeah, just got to keep showing up and know that there is a better day ahead.
Yeah. Let's get into a little bit of footwear. What kind of, first of all, like, is there a perfect shoe?
No.
Okay.
No. Coming from a guy that sells shoes for a living, there's not one perfect shoe.
How do you help sell shoes to runners? Like, do you look at biomechanics? Are you scanning feet? What are you doing to help a runner find their perfect shoe or find the shoe that works best for them?
Yeah, our outfitters, I think one of their best, they're not medical professionals, but one of their best and most required traits is they're good listeners.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the best ways to understand what's going to be the ideal footwear for a customer is just hearing them, hearing what they've worn, what they've liked, what they don't like, and then the next step is really observing their feet. And so we do use a 3D imaging, 3D scanner that just gives us really good context for the shape of the foot and the profile of the arch. From our perspective, what we're looking at is, we've scanned a couple million people over the years. And so when I scan your foot, I could say, okay, people that have similar feet to you and are doing similar activities or have similar goals have liked these shoes. Mm-hmm. Not saying you're going to like them, but the odds are good. And so let's at least try those. And so we have the data on thousands of pairs of shoes, from volume to cushion to stability to weight. And then we compare that with, like I said, arch profile, foot shape, things like width, volume. and then just offer them up as options and then get the feedback, listen, and go from there. So it's just such an individualized process. That's why when people do ask what's the best shoe, I'm like, the best shoe for me may be the worst shoe for you.
Yeah.
Because we are all different, and that's the most important piece.
Well, I think that's the one of the most important things is, like you said, the scanning, kind of looking at biomechanics. Not everyone's going to position their foot the same way, right? Some people might be a little bit more pronated. Some people might be supinated. There might be different ways that their knee tracks, when they're walking or when they're running, right? So all those different things can play into how their shoe is positioning the foot as well.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you see so many things about, having minimal shoe wear. You see so many things about having a little bit more of a sole to the shoe. It's just, it's hard to say. And like you said, what is good for somebody might not be great for somebody else. And I think it's important to go through, the process like you guys do and make sure that people have what is best suited for them.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff, in the world, and there's a lot of marketing out there, and I love all of our footwear partners, but, I've seen over the years the pendulum swing from, to 2010 when everything was minimal, barefoot, as little underneath as your foot as possible, to, I really think 2025 was the sort of end of the other side of the spectrum. Things were so thick, so soft. And we're finally starting to see things move back to the center again. And, there's just not a right or wrong answer. It's just preference, what you prefer. But there are some that I think, are better for others than some others.
Yeah. Shoes have gotten pretty expensive too.
Yeah.
Over the years. I mean, I just bought a new pair of Brooks a little bit ago. And yeah, it is. I mean, what kind of technology are they putting into shoes to help, or to keep up with, what people are wanting?
Yeah, I mean, that's the fun part. I love going to, I've been lucky enough to go to a lot of footwear factories and design studios and labs where they do all the testing on the foams. And it's pretty cool stuff, the way that they're infusing nitrogen and gases into these foams to make them, more resilient, last longer, lighter is the number one thing. It's pretty neat. And then even like the upper materials are becoming finer and more flexible and lighter and with moisture. So that part is cool. But yeah, they're getting expensive. But a really well-made piece of footwear is art. I really believe that. I always remind people, shoes are still handmade. They're that upper material and the outsole, midsole are hand assembled by somebody, one at a time. So there are real costs that go into manufacturing the shoes. And they're all made overseas, so we know what that looks like.
Well, and if you're serious about running, and if you sign up for your training program, if you sign up for a marathon, then you're serious about it, right? So why not get a good piece of equipment to help with that whole training process and to make things, feel better throughout the process, right? So having something to really support you throughout that process is important, right? Because ultimately, what can happen throughout the training program is if you have wrong equipment, if equipment that doesn't fit you the way it should, or if you don't like it and it's not supporting your foot, it can lead to injury, right? And that's something that obviously we want to try to mitigate throughout that whole process as well.
Yeah, I mean, we look at product solutions, and shoes not always going to solve an injury. That's why we love having great medical partners. But it could get in the way too if you put 1,000 miles on your shoe and you haven't replaced it, or you run on something too long. It's not going to do you any favor. So a shoe is definitely a worthy investment. And I've got plenty of friends that golf or ski or triathlon, and if you want to talk about expensive sports, I mean, shoes are the cheapest thing in the world, but there are more
bikes.
Yeah.
Jeez.
There are definitely more expensive ways to spend your money.
It's definitely. We talked a little bit, or mentioned, mitigating injury, and it's something that can happen. And we see runners that are trying to keep injury risk, manageable throughout the training process. Where do you see most runners end up getting injured throughout the training process?
It's so much lower leg, from the knee down. A lot of, when we're hanging out in the store, people come back, or people walk into the stores throughout the day, and something's come up that's causing them to maybe not keep their running consistent. Generally, I would say, not to over generalize here, but for that adult person, it's calf, Achilles, plantar fascia. yeah, it seems to be a lot of lower leg stuff these days. I don't know, maybe you have perspective on why that is.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest things we see is like, and we talk about this a lot with other providers, is when we have some of those like soft tissue or tendinopathies, so like a plantar fasciitis or like a lower leg, irritation or inflammation. A lot of it is just that the load has exceeded the capacity, right? So you're putting a lot of increased stress on those areas, right? And if somebody, an endurance athlete, a runner, if maybe they're not implementing like strength training into their programming, or they didn't have the tissue capacity, they didn't have the strength for those tissues before they started running, and now all of a sudden you're increasing your workload where you're putting tons of miles on these tissues that aren't ready for those miles to occur. At some point it's going to wear down, or there's going to be some biomechanical changes that put stress on the most vulnerable areas. So plantar fascia, Achilles tendon, some of the knee, if there's some tracking issues that go on there. So that's in my experience, and when we see a lot of runners, that's usually where we get that. It's just the load has exceeded tissue capacity and injury or breakdown starts to happen. So, I mean, are you guys doing any like strength training programming throughout the course of your training programs?
It's in the schedule. We don't do it as a group. It's just tough to have 300 people on a Saturday do a strength routine in a store. But yeah, I mean, it's been the single most beneficial thing that I've done personally over the last 5 years is implement a consistent strength schedule into my running and cycling. And yeah, we absolutely try to drill that into our runners, because it's funny. I mean, I know so many people that are extremely talented runners. They could run from sun up to sundown, but you ask them to do 25 push-ups in a row and it's a struggle. And I think that's a humbling thing sometimes to kind of educate these guys. I was like, look, you have to have some muscle mass. It's not going to slow you down. Right. But yeah, I mean, having a little bit of resiliency in the muscles is huge just for a runner.
For sure. And resiliency is the word there. It's the stronger you are, the more resilient you are, even if you are an endurance athlete. I think sometimes they're just a little scared of getting maybe a little too bulky, right? Where, when you see an endurance athlete, usually you see a very lean, like kind of, not necessarily stringy, but just a more lean individual that, when they kind of stay one track on either running or cycling or swimming, whatever it may be. But once you venture out into some strength training and putting on a little muscle and actually supporting the system for that activity that you want to do, the payoff is huge there.
Yeah. I, even my own sort of racing journey, I started to realize that, I don't know, probably 10 years ago. I remember I was very, very competitive in triathlon. I was showing up to do well. And I started to notice that the guys that were beating me were bigger. Like I was at the time maybe 150 pounds, super lean. And I was noticing that, in a long day, a half Ironman or longer even, the guys that were beating me weren't lighter, weren't smaller, but they were bigger guys. At the time, to me, they looked like, these aren't triathletes, they're, bodybuilders. They weren't that big, but I started to realize that their bodies were built to endure, the longer days better than mine. And that's really when I started to get into the strength training.
Yeah, that's great. Let's talk a bit about like hitting the wall at the end of a marathon, right? So like you're at, mile 20, right? How do you prevent, or how do you communicate to your runners who are in your programs? Like you need to have consistent fueling throughout. That way, when you get to mile 20, 21, and so on, there's not this just full on bonking. Right?
Yeah. All right. Here's my hill to die on this one. This is totally anecdotal. This is just 20 plus years of being in a running store. Mondays after a race are my favorite days to be in the store, because people come in and they tell you their stories. Good, bad, ugly. And I believe that runners, human beings, are good at eating. So you take somebody who's done a really good training plan, they're ready for the race. Because if you're not trained, that's a whole other thing. If you hit the wall at 20 because you didn't train properly, that's different. Assuming someone trained properly, they're going to hit the wall, first of all, know it's coming, that 2 hour, whatever the number is, that period of time where you've been running for a couple hours. People are good at eating. We're good at consuming our calories. We're going to get the gels down. We're going to get the whatever calories in. most conversations I've had, the large majority, people underestimate their electrolyte needs. I was actually very happy when I saw your element out on the counter there. Most, even experienced marathoners, even people that have been doing it for a long time, and certainly beginners, they'll tell me I did everything. I drank all the water. I ate all my calories. I took my gels. I'm like, what were you doing for your electrolytes? Your magnesium, your sodium, your chloride. Oh yeah, I just had a couple sips of Gatorade.
Yeah,
that's not enough.
Not gonna cut.
So when the body seizes up, when you hit the physically, thinking about what that means when you're hitting the wall, your muscle fibers don't want to elongate anymore. Your body just doesn't move like it did, 20 miles ago. It's generally because their electrolytes are completely out of whack at that point.
Yeah.
So I don't have scientific proof of that, but I believe that is generally what's happening.
Yeah, no, that's spot on, right? Like you've got to maintain those high sodium levels, right? Especially because it's easy on a hot day, right, to know like, hey, I'm sweating a lot. Like I am depleted because I can see how much I'm sweating. But on some of those colder days, right, when it's like you obviously don't see yourself sweating, but you are, right? You're losing a lot of those minerals and nutrients you need, but it's hard to notice that. So yeah, staying on top of sodium, potassium, magnesium. Like you said, the gels are easy, right? It's just being consistent with them. And it's interesting because the race I'm training for, I'm trying to come up with a plan. And so I ran the pig 3 or 4 years ago. And at mile 21, I hit a wall. It was over. Like I was,
Riverside, yeah.
It was, I was full on cramping. It was the year that there was the monsoon, right? So I was wet the whole time, right? And it was warmer. It was like probably in the mid 70s. And I just was not consuming enough of anything. And I could feel it at mile 20, 21, like both my right hamstring cramped up. I tried to stretch it for a second, then my left one cramped up. And I'm literally walking like straight legged. I'm trying to run. I'm walking straight legged for like the last 5 miles. And I had a great pace going, and then I completely hit a wall. But yeah, like it was where I was going with that is training for this race that I'm doing in August. Like I now realize like how much more you need as an endurance athlete throughout the course of, 3, 4, 5 hours long. Like it's way more than what people think. Like you should be aiming, in my case, I'm aiming for like 90 grams of carb, like 90 grams of carb. It's a lot. Yeah.
It's like you have to be
You just feel like you're constantly eating, you're like a gel every 20 minutes, 3 big gulps of a dense carbohydrate drink every 20 minutes. It's just staying on that schedule is so important. And I think it's very important for people who are, running the pig, just to understand, like, stay consistent with your fueling.
And you have to, for, people listening, 90 grams an hour is also something that has to be trained. Your gut has to learn to consume that. Don't go out and do that for the first time on Flying Big Race Day.
Yeah.
That is it's a lot, and you've been practicing for it, and you know what your body feels like. And it's great the way it responds, but that is also something that is a learned behavior. Like to take in that level of carbohydrate for 4, 5, 6, 7 hours at a time takes practice.
Yeah, definitely. It takes a lot of effort to stay on top of that. Yeah. Let's get into some personal stuff. What's been your hardest race?
Man, there's been a lot. I think back, I did this is back in like 2007. I did this half Ironman. I'm not sure if it's still around, but it was called the Frogman. It was on Coronado Island in San Diego, and it was a half Ironman put on by the like Special Warfare Frogmen. And so it was a tough race just because the swim was like a washing machine. I mean, literally like just the biggest waves I could imagine. 2 laps of that, and the reason why I say it was one of the hardest races is because the entire half marathon was on soft sand. And I remember just feeling so bad for myself and feeling like I couldn't take one more step forward, and seeing these guys in like full military gear, boots and the whole garb, like passing me. And it was a very humbling experience. So that was a long, long time ago. In more recent memory, the JFK 50 miler. 50 miles is a long way for me to run. Me personally, I don't think I need to run further than that ever. My wife will. She'll run double that distance and not think about it. But
yeah, has she always been a endurance athlete too?
I've always said pound for pound, she's a better endurance athlete than I am. Yeah, of course. I think I've been faster than her, but she could just run all day. In fact, she's probably doing that right now.
Really?
Yeah, and so she's done a couple 100 milers. She's training for her third one, Mohican, this summer.
has she always been an endurance athlete, or is that something she picked up?
Yeah, as long as her and I have been, dating, and in fact, when we went to high school together, we kind of took some time off in college, and we actually reunited at a triathlon. I saw her. I was like, "You do triathlon?" She's like, "You do triathlon?" Yeah, and it kind of came back together. But yeah, she's been an endurance.
That's really cool. You guys can support each other through those things. Just because you obviously know what it's like when you get stuck in that mentality of like, I don't know if I can push anymore. But to have somebody say like, "Come on, like you got it. You just got to keep going through." She did an ultra last year.
Yeah, she did. What did we do this past summer? We did one, or this past fall. It was called the Hennepin 100 in Iowa, and that was at its own challenges. It was a fairly flat 100-mile race. Like, just think about going on the Loveland bike path and running for 100 miles straight.
Yeah.
So I was her only crew member. It was just her and I out there for 20 whatever hours, and she crushed it.
That's awesome. What's so like you said, we're getting to this last 3 or 4 weeks until the pig. What's your advice for those runners coming down the stretch?
Right now it'd be to rest the body, focus on recovery. I was just saying this yesterday to somebody, your schedule, your weekly schedule, your daily schedule is less. You're in a taper mode, so we're kind of descending into race day. But don't mistake that for not being an athlete. Wake up every single morning, have the mindset of an athlete. You are an athlete every day, even if you're not training as much as you were. And so what that means is treating your body like one, foam rolling, getting a good routine on your nutrition, make sure your sleep is as good as possible. Tie up loose ends with work. Try to have as less. It's kind of funny how training for a marathon can be transcendent for your entire life, but see if you can just like de-stress at work. Try to tie up any big loose projects you've had, or have the conversation that might be on your weighing on you or something. But you want to roll into that first Sunday in May just feeling as light as possible, and as healthy as possible in all aspects of your life. And I think that's something that a lot of just kind of like, I don't want to call people marathoners weekend warriors, I hate that term, but a lot of athletes overlook. And they think about, well, I'm not, how many times do I hear in my life, I'm not a runner, I just run the pig every year. I'm like, yes, you are. You run a marathon every year, or a half marathon every year. So treat yourself like that. Treat yourself like, I promise you, LeBron James wakes up every day and thinks of himself as an athlete. He obviously is. I don't think it's a stretch for people like us to be thinking that way.
Not at all. Not at all. I think with the amount of consistency that goes into it, with the amount of thought that goes into how to prepare for, your runnings or your training programs. I think, like you said, all those people, they're athletes in their own right. And, when you look at like an endurance athlete, these people are so disciplined, right? And, it's, especially when you get to these high level endurance athletes, like when you're talking about yourself, like you're looking at these finite details, and, and a lot of times that just carries over into your personal life too, right? And it's like you've built Fleet Feet out to be, one of the premier running stores in Cincinnati. And a lot of that's probably due to the attention to detail that you have, with your training, right? With being an endurance athlete, it's crazy the crossover between when you look at, like the people that come and train for the pig, you probably see a lot of crossover between like high, I don't know what I'm trying to say, like high level performers. Yeah, high level performers, and outside of their life too. Good parents, strong in the workforce, right? So it's pretty cool to have something that is so difficult and so hard mentally to do for a long period of time, but the benefits you get from it outside of it too.
100%. I think one thing I've always been able to do is, as an athlete, I've always treated business like sport, and the same mentality. I wake up every day, I want to win. In a weird way, it's like I want to outwork my competition. I want to out-prepare. I want to out-train. I want to perform better on race day. And for business, race day just happens to be every day that we open our doors at Fleet Feet. And so I like that. I like approaching business like it is a sport, because, in sport, you want to win, you want to do your best. And it's just a fun way for me to like get myself excited every day when I do it.
It's the competitive mentality, and that's probably what makes you continue to show up in your endurance training too. It's just, you're now competing with yourself, right? So in business, you're competing with others, right? In endurance athlete, you're competing with yourself, and it's that continued crossover between the two.
Yeah, and as I get older now, I think I'm just competing with my younger self. Like I think back to, 25-year-old Frank and like how he was training and what times he was doing. And it's not that, oh, I have to still be that speed or have that finish time, but just maintain that level of discipline. One of the best, I don't know if it's advice or just something I heard from a speaker years ago is, the difference between motivation and like you said, discipline. And motivation is like, it's an emotional response. You could have low, high, I'm sure you're the same way. Some days you wake up, you're highly motivated. Some days you're not, but conviction is more of like a discipline, more of like a belief system. And I just remember someone saying like, you need conviction to be an endurance athlete because conviction doesn't wane. It is what you believe, and you wake up every day and you do your thing. But if you rely on motivation alone, it's just going to do this. And so like, that's exactly how I approach my life as an athlete and as a business owner.
What's your thoughts on like performance trackers like the Oura Ring or Whoop or stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I use Garmin, tracks, everything these days, sleep and my steps and calories. And there are even coaches now, they'll tell you, how well suited you are for the day's workout. I love it all, but I also love not using it sometimes because I like to use this as well. Like, how do I feel? What do I, think the next day should lead to? So data is everything. I think you can't be a competitive endurance athlete these days without leaning into data quite a bit. But I also think there's some value in turning it off sometimes. Yeah,
no, I think you're right. I think sometimes we can get so into the weeds in it, and you wake up and you see that your readiness score is trash, right?
I know.
And you're supposed to have a 15-mile run today, right? And it's like that gets in your mentality of, okay, did I not get a good night's sleep? Is my HRV low? Am I recovered enough to run, 10 to 15, 20 miles today? So I think it's important to have. I think it's a good tool to, to help see what your consistency looks like over a period of time. Yeah. But I wouldn't let one bad day, because even on some of those bad days, like you have, like, I know in my case, and maybe in your case too, if you're tracking and you see that you've had a bad day or you're in the red on Whoop and you still decide to train anyway that day, sometimes those are your best training days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes you put out the highest performance in some of those days.
Yeah, I don't even know how that works, but I've definitely had that happen. And I just think back to, once again, younger days of having nothing more than a Timex on my wrist, and same thing. Like, there were plenty of mornings where I felt not great, but you still wake up and you do your thing. And so sometimes these guys can be limiters, because I've been there where I'm like, it's telling me I don't feel good. I'm like, but I feel good. But what does my watch know that I don't? And so you go out anyway and you end up feeling great.
Yeah.
So it's not a perfect science.
Well, great, man. I appreciate you being on here. Thanks for taking the time. I think it was cool. It was a cool conversation just to, continue to elaborate on the endurance thing. This is kind of new in my world over the past couple of years. So it's been something that's really interesting, and I'm glad to have you on and talk about it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, man.